You ready?
Ready.
Okay, great. Well, we'll get kicked off here. Thank you all for tuning in and joining us for the Sustainability Webinar Series. This session is Operation and Maintenance. Our presenter today is Jason Hummel. He's a licensed engineer and resident engineer with USACE in the Baltimore District. He's been with the Baltimore District for 12 years. He's a graduate of Penn State University with a degree in architectural engineering. He has his lead AP and currently resides in Laurel, Maryland, and is working at the East Campus IPO at Fort Meade. His current projects include the East Campus Building 2 and East Campus Building 3. So with that, Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Kirk. Appreciate that. And I want to just welcome everybody today. Thank you for tuning in for our latest installment of the Sustainability Webinar Series. And today's one is one that sometimes I think maybe isn't necessarily on the forefront of our minds when it comes to sustainability, but it's really important for a number of different reasons, and we'll kind of go into that a little bit. But also just look at what part we can play as the Corps of Engineers when it comes to O&M of the facilities that we build. I think operation and maintenance is one of those things where we as USACE kind of have a hand in at the end of a lot of our projects, and it seems like at that point a lot of people have kind of moved on in the process. A lot of people that maybe were involved in the beginning stage of the job, or maybe in the real, heavy portions of construction, have kind of moved on. And I've found in my experience that you've got to be someone who kind of really is okay with being in it for the long haul, to be an O&M closeout type of person. And I don't know, for some reason that seems to be something that I get thrown into a lot on a lot of different jobs, and I'm fine with that. It is a tedious process though, and so I would say for those who are listening today, O&M and preparing for project closeout and turnover to our customer is not for the faint of heart. You're going to have to put in some time, some effort into that process, but it's worth it. And we're going to look at exactly why, from a sustainability standpoint, it's worth it. All right, so our objective for today is that we are going to describe strategies to maintain sustainable building performance during occupancy. So at the end of this presentation, what we expect is that you'll be able to describe what's involved in maintaining that performance. We design these facilities, we design our projects for a certain amount of performance, and how do we maintain that? And we're going to look at strategies that we can, or that we're supposed to implement based upon our guidance, but ways that we can also be involved in encouraging our customers and our end users to continue that ongoing building performance. We're going to focus on some of those key components of occupancy as they relate to sustainability. We're going to cover occupant education, post-occupancy operations and maintenance, and just how that extends through the useful life of our facilities. So a couple of the resources that we'll touch on today, and there are more than this that we're gonna hint at, but these are kind of the overarching, the larger ones, and you've probably seen these before if you've been on some of these webinars. Our UFC 1-200-02, which is our high-performing sustainable building UFC. We also will touch on some of the guidance, since the UFC refers to the IGCC, which is the International Green Construction Code. We will mention that a few different times. One thing I want to make a plug for is the next one on our resources, which is the USACE Sustainability MS Teams group. If you are not part of the Sustainability Microsoft Teams team, I would encourage you to go to that link and join the MS Teams group for USACE for sustainability. It's a really good place to go for some resources, these presentations for this webinar posted there, lots of other good tidbits and information that you can use when it comes to sustainability are on that Microsoft Teams location. So definitely join up for that. The Tri-Service Sustainability Program page on the Whole Building Design Guide is another one. And last but not least, you know, we would probably be remiss if we didn't at least mention LEED Online, since this is a Corps of Engineers presentation, and a lot of times we end up using LEED as our third-party certification body, but we're not saying that LEED is the only one, but we do use LEED for a lot of our projects, so I also have that referenced here. So some of the topics that we're going to hit on today, for, you know, if you're following along throughout the presentation, we're going to delve into commissioning activities and documentation a little bit. We're going to talk about building occupant education and training, plans for operation of our facility, measurement and verification, and we're also going to talk about recommissioning and retro-commissioning. So the thing about occupancy and operation and maintenance is, you know, some people, when they think of O&M, they don't really think about, you know, sustainability, because most people immediately go to design and construction for sustainability, because that's what we use as our measuring stick to get a building certified by one of our third-party certifiers. But really, when you think about it, occupancy and O&M is the very essence of sustainability, because the M in O&M, maintenance, you know, to maintain something is to maintain its use and functionality, and that's what sustainability, when you think about that word, to sustain, is all about. You know, like, we want our facilities to operate the way that we design them, and then we construct them, and then that we turn them over to our customer in a new or almost new condition to continue for as long as we possibly can. That is sustainability. That's the best outcome. That is when we realize our energy efficiency, we realize our water use reductions to their maximum potential. But the thing that isn't sustainable is when we let our property deteriorate to the point where it's not usable anymore, and then we have to replace it. That's not sustainable. That is using finite resources in a way that is not, you know, is not efficient. Then we're having to go back and you know, use those finite resources again to replace something where we could have gotten more use and more efficiency and more long-lasting use out of it. All right, so the first area we're going to look at when it comes to O&M and occupancy is commissioning activities and documentation requirements. And so our UFC 1-200-02 in section 2-2.2 is the overarching guidance for commissioning activities and documentation for high-performing sustainable buildings. And so in that UFC, it mentions a couple of different places where we can pull some guidance from. The first one being our systems commissioning procedures, and that's in ER 1110-345-723. There's the total building commissioning specification under our facilities guide specs, 019100.15. And then there is the IGCC 1001.3.1.2, which is the building commissioning process part of IGCC. So we're gonna kind of hit on some of the specifics of each of those in a little more detail over the course of the next couple slides. So the first one is area that we're going to hit when it comes to commissioning, and this comes out of IGCC 1001.3.1.2, is that we have post-occupancy activities that we want to see for commissioning. And one of those is that during the first year of occupancy, we need to verify the delivered building complies with the owner's project requirements. And so part of the way we do that is you're going to see down below some of the ways that we do that. And so we do that through trend logging. So trend logging is when we observe how our building systems are performing. We can do some off-seasonal testing. So depending on when our facility was commissioned, we may have not been able to maximize the testing that we did for, I'll say, optimal or highest load conditions. So if we were commissioning our boiler system in the summer, we may not have been able to maximize the load potential for when we tested that. Same way, if we're commissioning our cooling system in the winter months, we may not have been able to maximize the potential for how we tested those systems. So off-seasonal testing is one that's required by the IGCC. Operations and maintenance staff training is required by the IGCC. And lastly, the final commissioning report is also part of that post-occupancy commissioning activities. So in addition to those activities, we also have some post-occupancy documents that are to be generated. And so our total building commissioning spec talks about, at the very, very end, talks about post-construction support. And what it says is that in that guide specification, it references Engineer Regulation 25-345-1. And what it recommends, and it actually states in the guide spec that it recommends these things, so they are not hard and fast that they always have to be on every project, but they're recommended when we have the opportunity to put them into the contract, we should. But it gives us two caveats for when we don't have to put these requirements into a contract. It says if we have a closely monitored building system, okay? So if we have a building that we know we are going to have close monitoring of it by our end users, by the DPW, then we could consider not putting these requirements in, or if there's just no funding for it. So it gives us two outs, but we always want to try to make sure that these are incorporated into our contract whenever possible. So when we look at that Engineer Regulation 25-345-1, what it says is that we need to perform a couple of different things. We need to do a post-occupancy field site walk, and also we need to do endurance testing. Those are the two recommended post-occupancy, post-construction activities that are recommended by the guide spec. And part of that field walk and part of that endurance testing are that we should be doing a trend log report. And so those trend log reports will see how our facility, how our systems are performing compared to the way they were designed, the way they were commissioned before occupancy. And then what we can do is take those trend log reports and do an analysis, do a recommendation report for any things that we see where our facility and our systems are deviating from the owner's project requirements. So if we see something that's happening that is not performing the way that it was intended, or maybe the conditions are different than what we originally anticipated, those recommendations would come out in that report. And so then what can happen is changes can be made. We can course correct a little bit if our initial assumptions were not correct. We can make adjustments to the system. But if we do that, then what we need to do is we need to do an updated commissioning report and systems manual based upon those corrections or any changes that we've made. So like I said, that site walk is supposed to be done by the CXC and the CXG. For those who aren't commissioning folks, that is your construction commissioning specialist and your government commissioning specialist. And so when we do that walk, we check our trend log report, we note observations, make recommendations, and then any changes that happen need to be updated in this commissioning report and systems manuals. Just one more thing as we're going through, if anybody has any questions today, please type them in the chat, and Kirk can bring them to my attention and we can answer them as we go. There's also going to be some times where we are going to go through a couple of case study examples. And if you have anything to contribute to those, please feel free to type that in the chat as well, and we'll bring them up. Specifically, if you're someone who was familiar with the Seattle office or works in the Seattle office, that's a good chunk of where those case study examples come from. So I would ask if you have anything to add in during that portion, please do. We'd appreciate that. All right, so another aspect of commissioning and what comes out of the commissioning process when it comes to O&M and performing maintenance on the system and what we've designed and built is the O&M manuals. And so our facility guide spec section 017823 talks a lot about operations and maintenance manuals for all building systems in our project, and those O&M manuals are required to be assembled, submitted, reviewed, and approved by the Corps of Engineers. And so what happens is they become an integral part of the way that we're going to manage that facility, and they will help us reduce operating costs through the maintenance that we're going to do on our building systems. And so our guide spec has certain things that need to be included in those O&M manuals. We require equipment-specific system-level O&M information to include the following list: physical descriptions of the system, functional descriptions, troubleshooting procedures, preventative maintenance, both procedures and the schedule, which is important to note that the schedule is included in there so that our folks who are maintaining and doing maintenance on those systems know the frequency with which they should be performing those procedures. Any corrective maintenance, so if they, not just preventative maintenance, but if they do troubleshooting on something that seems to have gone wrong, what corrective maintenance and repairs need to be conducted. A parts list, and that could be a spare parts list. It could also be, sometimes it's just a contact list of the manufacturer and who to reach out to for different parts. And then last but not least, the operation and maintenance significant drawings. So some contracts will require submission of the shop drawings for a system also as part of that O&M and part of the as-built package that comes across. But what happens is that after those O&Ms have been submitted, approved, and we've had a chance to process them through the system, then we're ready for the contractor to schedule and perform his staff training with the O&M staff. And the commissioning authority is supposed to verify completion of that training. All right, so next we have not just our O&M manuals, but our O&M systems manual. So this comes out of that Engineer Regulation 25-345-1. And what it says is that we need to indicate as part of our systems manual any special tools, materials, or test equipment needs. So we're trying to set our O&M maintenance folks up for success. So we need to make sure that they are fully aware of any special tools or materials or test equipment that they're going to need to do their regular preventative maintenance on our facility systems. Those O&M systems manuals also should confirm completed training of the O&M staff. So there should be some kind of sign-in sheet or something that indicates who was present at the training and, you know, that full package of what training occurred. Also, the equipment warranty information should be included in there. And last but not least, ongoing system optimization procedures. And so what that includes, in the engineer regulation actually breaks it down. It says that those system optimization procedures should include three things: procedures for performing and documenting ongoing commissioning. So if there are ways that ongoing commissioning can happen by the O&M staff, that should be documented. Also, techniques for periodic benchmarking. So the report that we got for commissioning when the building was commissioned, there have to be techniques for measuring against that benchmark in an ongoing manner, so that the O&M staff can figure out, hey, if I see something that's out of the ordinary, I can compare it to what we had initially and determine, hey, maybe I have an issue here that needs to get looked at. And then we have to have procedures in there for documenting, you know, anything that we notice, changes, results, you know, anything that comes out of that field walk and those recommendations that are talked about in the guide spec. If we do those, we have to have a way to document them. All right, so I want to make sure that as we talk about some of these things which are post-occupancy, we also mention a couple of the tools that we have available. And we call this Agile for facility management. So it's kind of like managing things real time. And one of the ways that I believe that we are really, you know, we've made a lot of strides in, but there is much more to come, is in the area of BIM. And I say that because there is so much data available to us when it comes to our building models now. And it, you know, it probably, I can only, you know, if you look at just the nature of data collection across, you know, not just the building industry, but everywhere in our society now, it seems like data is only getting more, you know, more intense, more, you know, there's more data to be collected with every program that comes out. So I don't see that changing in society as a whole. I don't see it changing as a factor of our building models either. And so as we get better about using building models, you know, like we have to ask the question, we're collecting all this data, you know, like we're putting a lot more into our building models. Well, what do we do with all of that? You know, and I think it helps us in DoD to solve, or maybe start to take steps to solve, one of the really big issues that DoD has had, which is, I have it here as the Dod Sustainment Dilemma. And that issue is that DoD is really, really good at building new things. They're just not good at taking care of new things. Seems like the trend is that we would rather let something kind of get to the point of failure and then replace it than we would to keep it going at a high level for a long period of time. And so, you know, USACE, I don't know exactly where this is at anymore in the process, but USACE has been taking steps over the years to try to come up with ways to be better about sustaining the things that we build. And so ERDIC was working on something called Builder, SMS. And so it was software where you could inventory building equipment, property, things like that. And then through that process, you would take that inventory, you do regular assessments just to make sure that, hey, it's working properly, it's still functioning, correctly. And then through that, as you do those assessments, you would start to predict, hey, we can see this property or this system or this facility functioning, and start to predict when improvements might need to be made to it, or when replacement might need to happen. And then you can start putting in place funding for that ahead of time. Not when it breaks and we are kind of stuck, but start to do that ahead of time and forecast what the needs are going to be for O&M in the long term. So there are things that are in place and that we're trying to develop to get ahead of that dilemma and that issue. But I think some of our customers anyway, at least the ones that I work with. So I'm here at Fort Meade, and we are building the NSA campus expansion. And our NSA customer actually has a pretty elaborate building management system and sustainment system that they use. I mean, they do all of this already. They inventory every piece of you can imagine in their facility, and they have a team that goes around and every so often does periodic assessments, and they plan for maintenance and replacement and all those sort of things through that system. And our building model feeds into that. And so there's a lot of things I think that as the Corps of Engineers and maybe some of our other customers, we can really use all that data we're collecting on our systems and pieces of property within our projects that could be really helpful to feed into something where we assess and we start to plan ahead and get ahead of things when it comes to operations and maintenance. But the difficult part when it comes to O&M is that the Corps of Engineers, we are not the primary driver of that. A lot of times on our installations, it's going to be DPW who's kind of the primary driver of that. So what do we do in that situation? How do we influence the process when it comes to sustainability for the long term and operations and maintenance? Somebody, I think Alice just said, do our customers use Builder? That's probably the next step, is actually getting to the point where our customers are using something like that. And I don't know that they are at this point. I can say that here.
It's Searle. The SMS team works at Searle, and they can answer this better than I can. But I know there's been teams doing inventory on all the bases to get builders set up. So if somebody's really interested, I can get you to talk to the right person that can answer all the right questions.
Yeah, I know a while back when I was looking into
it's Michael Greiser.
Is Matt Walters?
Yeah, Matt Walters is the branch chief.
Okay. Yeah, I think Matt Walters was the person who kind of got directed to previously. Okay. But yeah.
It's Michael. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it, Michael.
Hey, it's Michael Greiser from Headquarters USACE, Chief of Programs Branch, and formerly of IMCOM. DoD put out a memo almost 10 years ago now requiring all DoD components to inventory and use Builder. So yes, every DoD component is using it in some level of maturity of using it to actually prioritize maintenance, with the Army probably the farthest behind and the Navy probably the farthest ahead, in actually using the Builder reports to prioritize their sustainment maintenance and doing the periodic re-inspections. But yes, Searle developed the program, and then various different ways the services and defense agencies went out and contracted or did in-house the initial inspections, and then are subsequently contracting or doing in-house the follow-on recurring inspections. Over.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think what you just said about Army probably being the farthest behind, most of the projects that I work with that are not NSA are Army. And so I think I've seen a lot of the, trying to catch up in that process. And yeah, I think I would agree with that Army probably is a little more behind than maybe some of the others. I just saw somebody, how is Builder integrated with FEM? Isn't FEM already tracking equipment maintenance and status? Because somebody, what is FEM?
Yeah, that's your
equipment
maintenance management system, right? That's the computerized maintenance management system that Civil Works uses?
Yes. Civil Works.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Civil Works doing Builder?
Jason, this is Eddie Johnson. I can tell you right now, and Michael, I appreciate the comment, but a lot of garrisons are not using Builder. That contract that they let at headquarters did reach the garrisons, but did not get into the weeds.
As I pointed out, they were everything that was, so the Army was required by DOD to resource the initial inspections. That was all completely done. They're wrapping it up now. Each garrison then, because of how IMCOM operates, for example, and every service operates, somewhat similarly, so independently, each garrison then had to make a decision to what extent they would use the Builder data. In the Army specifically, the Army does not have other than Civil Works, the Army does not have a computerized maintenance management system. So there is no way to to electronically take the Builder data and do anything with it, and put it into a maintenance management system that could then generate, sustainment work orders that exist in the Army. So every garrison, various points in deployment, you'll run into some garrisons if you get out there and see that are very advanced in how they use the Builder information because they've got the staff to hand jam and include it all together by hand. And some garrisons that are just completely ignoring it because they don't have the staff to do it. Over.
Yeah, at Wiesbaden, they never came, and I'm here in Hawaii right now. They never came out, and you're right. It's still waiting for an answer how to solve that problem. Maintenance management. It's a Microsoft database. I did have a contractor that could work it into my maintenance management system, but I don't know what they have in Hawaii. But that's the problem with Builder in general.
Again, the Army does not have a computerized maintenance management system. The non-Civil Works, the other side of the Army, does not have a computerized maintenance management system. So there is nothing to connect Builder data to other than a bunch of Excel spreadsheets or
it's a shame.
Systems.
I think they've mapped it into Maximo for some hospitals, but they are also trying to tie Builder to the RFP wizard for work orders or for renovation kind of projects. Again, I can't talk to the details of this, but there's a lot of work going on with, smart projects, I'll say.
So yeah, and if you start working with the other services, that actually have Navy having Maximo and Air Force having Tririga, that actually have honest to God computer maintenance management systems and take sustainment much more seriously than the Army does, you'll see how they have been for years integrating the results of the Builder inspections, into their prioritization for sustainable work orders at the base level, in just a much more mature system. So we deal with all customers. When you get out there and look and you'll see, across the Defense Department, wide varieties, some very, very, very mature organizations that have a very robust method of prioritizing sustainment work, and then some probably on the far end of that. The other end is some Army garrisons that are just completely on their butt and are, just some poor slob there has got an Excel spreadsheet and that's the best they can do.
Yeah. I think it would be nice to have a presentation on SMS Builder and the future of data for this group, because you guys would ask them good questions.
Yeah. Now,
was somebody on there from Searle? Did I hear somebody?
I'm on from Searle. I'm Annette. Yeah.
All right. Hey, very nice to meet you, Annette. Yes, you're the absolute experts on it. It'd be fabulous.
Yeah. So I'm not on the SMS team. I'm in the same branch, but I think that would be fun to get them to talk. They've got some really cool data visualization plans.
They do.
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all,
ESMS
not
and
to
the
get too
connection of
far
the
off.
systems together. Searle has some really neat stuff coming, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's the way the services are organized, the way DoD is organized, it's still very dependent on each individual installation, garrison, agency, subunit, deploying it and making it work locally.
Agreed.
It was really cool to have an SMS presentation. Over.
I'll tell you what, first of all, I just want to say thank you to Annette and Edwin and Michael. Appreciate all of those insights from headquarters and ERDIC and all the different, and from the installation side. It's nice to kind of hear what each side of that is doing. And I think maybe a good thing to do would be to reach out to Matt and see if ERDIC can do some kind of a SMS builder presentation of kind of where we're at, with things. That'd be great.
So hey, so
all that to say,
you brought up the BIM model as well, and BIM model is another great example of an outstanding product that you provide, that USACE, now I say we now, me, since I've been working for USACE for a couple of years now, provide to the garrison or to the base, and the ability of the base to use the BIM model also varies dramatically. I mean, there's many bases that received your BIM model, stuck it on a shelf, and never ever looked at it again. And then there's some that are more mature and can actually use them, during sustainment and O&M. But and lastly, a point you brought up of what can USACE do to assist installations. A great example is when USACE turns a building over to the installation, that we turn over a completed builder set of data to them, so they don't have to go out and separately contract to have a builder updated, both in construction and in an R&M project. Give them a clean, fresh set of brand new builder data. Over.
Yeah, I agree. And so, like, one of the things that the projects that I do here on the NSA campus are that their database that they use is one where we have our contractors, and then we also do walks with them to collect all that data prior to turnover, and then their team takes the workbook that we compile, uploads it into their system, and is able to use that then. So it's in conjunction with the BIM model, NSA does a really good job of utilizing all that data. So I agree with everybody that said the capabilities of the end user or the one who's receiving all the data makes the biggest difference in the world. That is really absolutely true. To keep going, because we are want to make sure we don't get too crunched for time here, because we are at slide 10 of 20. And but I do want to jump to kind of just a case study from the Seattle district office to make sure that we also look into some of the things that are done from an O&M perspective in ways that office, and when it was built, the ways that they ensured continuing functionality of the facility. So, like I said, if there's anybody who has anything they want to type in the chat about their experiences with any of this stuff as we're going through, please do, and we'll try to just mention your comments. But so one of the areas that office kind of excelled in was building occupant education and training. And so what they did was they took time to kind of explain to the occupants kind of some of the features of the facility. Also, what happened was that they put an incentive in place for the performance of the building with the contractor. And so that kind of incentivized the contractor to, one, make sure that they're to do regular checks of their systems after occupancy to make sure that they were performing the way that they should, because if they were anticipating a certain amount of energy performance and their system wasn't doing it, that was going to hurt their chances of getting that incentive award and that that kind of incentivized monetary award. But also they realized that it would be really critical for the building occupants to buy into what they were doing. And so they put together a number of pamphlets and pieces of information where they could communicate to the building occupants ways that the building performed, things that they could do to sort of help with the consumption side of the energy equation, or the consumption side of the water equation. All those different ways that the occupants could be part of what was going on. So that building occupant education and training was, I think, seemed like it was pretty successful for that facility. So like I said, they kind of explained to the occupants the way that the heating and cooling system worked, and why the reason that was important is because think about, like, if you are someone who's used to a regular, like, forced air furnace system where you hit the thermostat, and next thing you know, there's hot air or cold air blowing immediately. If all of a sudden you go to a high efficiency, like more of like a heat pump system or geothermal, that's not reality. Like, you don't get instantly, air that is instantly at the temperature or a higher temperature to bring that space up immediately to the point that you want it to be at. It's going to take place over a longer period of time and in slower, more gradual increments. And so it's important that building occupants are aware of that. So when they know, hey, if I hit the thermostat really high, I'm not all of a sudden going to get really warm air or really cool air to kind of change the space. It's going to happen gradually, and I shouldn't try to force the system to do something it's not capable of. And so it was good to make people aware of that, and also identify, like we said before, ways that their performance and the way they use energy or use water or whatever it happens to be in the facility can really affect and contribute to the performance of the facility. So once again, that happened through a number of different ways, but part of it was kind of setting the expectations and understanding for the occupants. So like I said, they mentioned the fact that the air conditioning system, if you look at the move-in tip, the air conditioning system in the building is like a tortoise that raced the hare in the traditional fable. So they kind of said, hey, it's going to happen more slowly. It's not going to be an instantaneous change in conditions. It's going to take a little bit longer. So they set the expectation for people so they didn't become dissatisfied with the system, but understood the way it really worked. I always think of like my dad, he always kind of cracks me up because when he has a smartphone, and he hasn't had it for very long, but when he uses it, I think, no matter how fast of a smartphone he has, he always thinks it should work faster. And so he'll like try and click things like 10 times, in the time that it should take it just to do it once, because he just doesn't have the expectation that he has to be a little more patient. I think that goes a long way when it comes to occupancy, is making sure that people understand the way that things are supposed to work, the way that they were intended to work, so that way their expectations are in line. So another aspect was that they did with their building occupant education was to make sure that they if you're going to change the way they do things, for a lot of people, a big part of that is understanding the impact that their actions can have. And so what they did was they made sure to state what the impact of being efficient with energy, be efficient with water, can have on the environment. And so they kind of stated, hey, if we stick to what we're saying we can do with this facility, we can have this environmental impact. And so I hope, I don't know for sure, but I'm hoping that people who are users in the facility were able to look at that and say, wow, that's a motivator. Like that really will cause me to think twice about putting my portable little space heater in my cube and really running up the electricity usage because I can't wait for the system to slowly adjust over time. Hopefully, those identifications of the impacts of their actions were really helpful. Is there anybody that's on the meeting today that works in the Seattle office? If not, that's okay, but I just figured I'd give you a chance to chime in on any experiences you have with the office before we move on. All right. Well, the next item that we have is plans for operation. So, I think talking about earlier, like when you are someone who's involved with closeout and turnover of a project, there is a lot to be said for the documentation you turn over, whether that is your BIM model, whether that is your O&M manuals, whether that are your as-built drawings. All that documentation really, in my mind, is our greatest way to influence the process. And I mean, there's others as well, but I think part of that, really, when I look at it, the biggest influence that we can have is good documentation of the proper way to operate and maintain that facility. And so Army SDD policy tells us to follow the IGCC, which is the International Green Construction Code, section 1001.3.1.2, concerning plans for operation. And they identify a couple areas in there that I think really relate to sustainability in a couple of different ways. So I just want to identify those. So the first one is site sustainability. And so what they talk about there is that if you have trees and vegetation on your site that are supposed to be used as shading elements, okay, or your roofing, which is, really a key to our our building's performance as well, especially if it's a vegetated roof. We need to make sure that we have maintenance protocols and an operation plan in place to make sure that those trees and vegetation, if they're used for shading, or that roofing continues to function the way that we designed it to, and in the way that it's supposed to provide that shading, to provide that cover for our roof, so that we maximize the energy performance that we've prescribed for those elements. The other one is water use efficiency, and so part of that that IGCC section says that we have to do initial measurement and verification of our water use efficiency, and then we track and we assess and we document. We continue to do that. That initial water use efficiency is supposed to start no later than right when the building is accepted and that testing's been completed and we've gotten that certificate of occupancy. That's when that initial measurement and verification is supposed to happen. And then we track and we assess that water use number at the end of 12 months, and then later, no later than 18, or at least 12 months, but then no later than 18 months after initial occupancy. And so we use that to, first of all, create our benchmark water use data, and then we use that to kind of inform our capital investment decisions, or really sort of use that for future planning. Two other areas when it comes to plans for operation: energy use efficiency, very similar to water use, where we do that initial measurement and verification, and then we track and we assess and we document. And that tracking and assessing and documenting, really, it gets back almost to when we looked at the total building commissioning guide spec. That very last part of the guide spec talks about post-construction site walk and endurance testing, and that, if we can get those into the contract, they recommend that. And that really, is all about tracking, assessing, documenting. You know, like we're continuing the process that we benchmarked through our initial commissioning process, and now we're going to track and assess how is that facility performing compared to what it was originally tested and set up to do over time. And so as we do that, we assess, is it working? And we document any tweaks or changes that we've done to the system. And then last but not least, the other area that the IGCC talks about is indoor air quality, having an operations plan for indoor air quality. And so a couple of the ways that they recommend that operations plan be set up is to monitor our outdoor airflow and making sure that we have scheduling and documentation for checking indoor air quality and also our outdoor air, how much we're introducing into the space. And then also they recommend that if it's possible to have a building green cleaning plan also in place for enhancement of indoor air quality. All right, so measurement and verification. This one is captured under the UFC 1-200-02, section 2-4.4. And so what it says in there is that metering, monitoring, and sub-monitoring for each utility at the building, we're supposed to have a utility meter, and that meters have to be connected to the base-wide energy and UMCS. And specifically for Army projects, those are supposed to electronically report to Army's Enterprise Meter Data Management System, or the MDMS. And so the verification side of that then is where we evaluate and verify collected utility data during occupancy. So, you know, we kind of had assumptions we made during design and construction of what kind of consumption we were gonna use for a whole bunch of different utilities for the building, and then we verify whether or not those assumptions were correct. And so that all plays into that trend logging, that just confirmation of our initial owner project requirements, whether they're still valid, whether or not we need to make tweaks to the system. One of the things when it comes to sub-metering under that measurement component is that sometimes, depending on what installation you're working on, sub-metering may or may not be authorized. So we have to make sure that we have authorization to do sub-metering for our installation. Okay, two more items when it comes to commissioning are the concept of recommissioning and retro-commissioning. So these are just slightly different. I mean, they're both taking place on a facility that is existing, but recommissioning is for a facility that was previously commissioned, and then after it's been occupied and being used for a certain amount of time, we go back and we investigate and kind of do that analysis of the performance of the building and make sure that, okay, maybe we need to recommission some systems because we had something that was really far out of line compared to what we anticipated initially. We go back and we recommission. So that's recommissioning. Retro-commissioning is where we have a facility that was not previously commissioned and it's existing, it's occupied, and now we're going to do commissioning for the first time on an occupied facility. My question for the group is, you know, like think about some of these items like commissioning, the use of data and everything like that we've talked about today. You know, we mentioned the fact that DPW is kind of the real driver on most of our installations for these post-occupancy sort of activities and the work that happens post-occupancy. When I think of closeout, in addition to the documentation we turn over, making sure that we fold DPW into the commissioning and closeout and red zone process is critical. There have been times where I've reached out to DPW and I've kind of gotten, no response, and that's fine. I mean, I take that as I made an effort to make sure they were involved, but maybe just kind of taking that extra steps to make sure that someone from DPW is involved in those end stage processes, I think would go a long way, not only to their understanding of the needs of the facility, but also just how they can most effectively use the documentation we're going to turn over to them. Because if they really understand its capability, I think that they'll maybe have a better grasp on how they can use it. But once again, just like some of the gentlemen earlier said, a lot of it comes down to how much funding does DPW have? What are their resources? Right now, I know here at Fort Meade, the DPW over there is hurting for staff. So part of that is not really something that we can control as the Corp engineers. But it's important, whenever we can, to fold them into those closeout proceedings and closeout processes. So just as a quick review, the 5 kind of areas that we covered as far as strategies to maintain sustainable building performance during occupancy. We talked about commissioning activities and documentation, both kind of the documentation we turn over for the commissioning activities we previously did, and then per the total building commissioning spec, the post-occupancy activities we could also do. We talked about building occupant education and training, and that has to do with the O&M manuals, the way that the building's performing, plans for operation. We looked at what the IGCC talks about as far as what we need in plans for operation for the areas of site shading and roofing, for water efficiency, for energy efficiency, and also for the other one. For indoor air quality. We looked at measurement and verification of each utility, and also the ideas of recommissioning and retrocommissioning. Recommissioning being for facilities that were previously commissioned, and now we commission them again after occupancy at some point, and then retrocommissioning, which is facilities that were previously not commissioned, and now we are going to commission them for the first time after occupancy. So with that, does anybody have any questions? All right, let's see. It looks like Edwin said there may be a possibility to procure retro-commissioning through existing energy-saving performance contracts if the contract includes opportunity to add components to existing systems, which could prompt retro-commissioning action. True. Yeah, there are those contracts where you can do energy savings performance contracts, and yes, if they add or change out something to enhance that energy savings, then we may need to do commissioning on that system for the first time. Yeah, would be a retro commissioning action. Any other questions or items to bring up?
This is Clayton Harrison from the Alaska District. I had a question about commissioning agents, and in particular, it's come up a few times at our district whether commissioning agents, they need to be independent and so forth, but could they be a subcontractor of a DOR, for instance, or could they be directly in that firm of a DOR but independent of that DOR's or the PDT and so forth? I was just hoping you could elaborate a little bit about that topic. Over.
That is a topic I think that's every district has probably kicked around, at one point or another, just because it is one that people wrestle with. Like, who's the commissioning agent? How do you, like you said, how do you make sure that they are independent and yet at the same time involved from the very beginning? Like, that's also something that we look at as well. I would ask Kirk, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I agree with you. It tends to be district related. There is some guidance out there with a lead. I'd say that's probably been the toughest one, is making sure you have enough degrees of separation for a lead, especially with some of the CXG roles and how that kind of carries over. As far as clear guidance goes, no, I don't have one. I mean, we've kicked that question around in our district several times as well.
Yeah, I know specifically when it comes to lead for a number of our jobs, establishing who that person, like, we've tried as much as we can to have that person be within the Corps of Engineers, but it's that tough dilemma of making sure that that person has been around from the inception. And then, like, if you have turnover and stuff like that and you lose that designated person, then, who do you fall back to? But yeah, definitely not a totally cut and dry.
This is Richard Karstens from Alaska District also. I'm a little confused now. Does the Corps of Engineers, are you saying that you prefer a Corps of Engineer employee to be the commissioning agent for some of our buildings too? Especially the design builds?
So, yeah, so that's the tough, I think the tough part when you're talking about design build, for example, is that because technically the commissioning agent is supposed to be part of the process of the owner's project requirement development and all of that, which the design builder would not be part of that. Mm-hmm. And so that's where you look at and you say, okay, well, who are our entities that could fulfill that? That would be there from the very beginning through completion of the actual commissioning plan, testing, and everything like that. And there aren't many, and so the Corps could function as one.
That's good. Good to know.
Yeah. Okay.
One more question. We do have projects that we are requesting enhanced commissioning, but it's not a lead project. The scope of work is not called out as a lead project, but we still are looking for an enhanced commissioning. So how can we clarify a difference between lead and enhanced somehow?
That's the funny part, is that the term enhanced commissioning is actually a lead.
Yeah,
kind of introduced term.
Lead. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if there's a good way to
follow it, but not.
Yeah, like if there's a good way to say, hey, you need to follow what lead calls enhanced commissioning, even though it's not a lead. Like, I mean, you could always take the verbiage of what is prescribed for lead for enhanced commissioning and put that into your contract, but I don't know if that's the case with your particular contract.
And I'll say the total building commissioning that, USACE does picks up a lot of the heavy lifting of the enhanced commissioning. We kind of see it. I typically see it the other way around, is we're reviewing AE's work and they're doing total building commissioning and they're doing everything, but they're not going for enhanced commissioning and trying to explain to them how they're leaving credits on the table with a lead. So that would probably be another method. Is I think if you looked at the total building, you could probably see that you're going to get a lot of the same things as the enhanced.
That's very true. Yeah, what Kirk says is true. That our total building commissioning covers, our fundamental commissioning that Lee talks about, and also the enhanced as well. So yeah, if you just went with our total building commissioning, you would be covered for enhanced.
And to Craig's comment there is, picking up the design, that's where you'll see, if with our total building, you should have the design review and coordination there as well, versus only picking things up in construction.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. All right. Any other questions before we wrap it up for today? All right, well, thank you everybody who jumped on the call today. Appreciate your attendance, and it's a little early to say it, but hey, have a great 4th of July weekend, and hope it's a good one.